For decades, we've really only seen the JFK assassination from one side, the American side. But what about the Soviets? What did they know? Well, we're about to dive deep into a recently declassified Kremlin dossier that gives us this incredible, rare look into their perspective on the man at the center of it all, Lee Harvey Oswald. So that's the big question we're asking here. And just to be clear, we're not trying to solve the assassination itself. What we are trying to do is understand what was going through the minds of America's biggest rival. We want to get a handle on their intelligence, their sheer panic, and the political chess moves they were making during one of the most explosive moments of the entire 20th century. Okay, so our story begins deep inside the Kremlin archives. We're talking about a file stamped with that intimidating top secret marking in Cyrillic. We are going to unpack this thing, basically document by document, to see the JFK assassination through the eyes of the KGB. All right, so before we even get to that fateful day in Dallas, this dossier actually kicks off years earlier. It starts with the very, very strange case of a young American defector who just shows up on Moscow's doorstep. And that man, of course, was Lee Harvey Oswald. And let me tell you, Oswald's 2.5 years in the Soviet Union were just bizarre. He gets there, he tries to defect, and they tell him no. So what does he do? He attempts suicide. And then, in this wild twist, the Soviets suddenly change their tune, grant him residency, and ship him off to work in a factory in Minsk. You have to wonder, what on earth were they thinking? What were they supposed to do with this guy? So this was his opening line. A former U.S. Marine, at the absolute height of the Cold War, just waltzes in and asks for Soviet citizenship. I mean, you can practically hear the alarm bells screaming inside KGB headquarters, right? But the Soviets were suspicious. They weren't buying it, so they denied his request. Oswald's reaction wasn't to just pack his bags and go home. No, he did something drastic, something that landed him right in a Moscow hospital. And now the Soviet authorities have a real problem on their hands. What do they do with this very problematic American? And this is where it gets really interesting. The official medical assessment is just fascinating. The doctors basically said, look, this guy isn't mentally ill, but he has this incredibly strong will. He's dangerously determined. And that put the KGB in a really tough spot. I mean, if they let him die, it's a huge international incident. But if they accept him, well, that's a massive risk. So after watching him after all their surveillance, the KGB's final conclusion was pretty cut and dry. They decided Oswald was unstable, he was definitely not one of their agents, and frankly, he had zero intelligence value. To them, he was just a headache, a nuisance, not an asset. In the end, they kind of solved their Oswald problem by just shipping him off to Minsk. They gave him a menial job at a radio factory and kept him under some light surveillance. For the Soviet state, he was just this weird, insignificant guy they had to manage until, hopefully, he just went away. Okay, let's jump forward in time. It's just over a year after Oswald has left the USSR. Suddenly, news from Dallas, Texas sends absolute shockwaves through the Kremlin. And what this file shows us is that their first reaction, it wasn't celebration. It was pure, unadulterated panic. Check this out. This memo, written only 3 days after the assassination, it lays their biggest fear bare. They see Oswald's name connected to the crime, and their minds immediately go to one place. This is a setup. They call it a slanderous fabrication, something designed specifically to frame them, the Soviet Union, for murdering the President of the United States. And you gotta understand, the Kremlin's fears were coming from all directions. They were terrified that some right-wing faction in the U.S. military could use this as an excuse for a coup, or even worse, a nuclear first strike. So for them, stabilizing the whole situation and proving they were innocent became priority number one. Absolutely everything else came second. And the dossier shows them basically turning into detectives. They're analyzing this mysterious letter that supposedly came from Oswald, and they notice something huge. It was typed, but all his other letters were handwritten. Their conclusion was instant. It's a provocation, a forgery planted to point the finger right at them. So, here they are, staring down the barrel of a potential global catastrophe. And the Kremlin makes a decision that is just stunning. They decide to open up their secret files and actually cooperate with their number one enemy, Washington. And their response was so calculated, so strategic. Step 1. Send a very high-level diplomat to JFK's funeral as a show of respect.
Step 2. Have that diplomat meet directly with the new president, Lyndon Johnson, to offer reassurance. But the biggest move, the most critical step, was when their ambassador personally handed over their entire Oswald file to the U.S. State Department.
But let's be real, this wasn't them just opening the floodgates. The Warren Commission asked for absolutely everything they had. What the Soviets gave them was, let's call it, a carefully curated package of official documents, just enough to back up their story that Oswald was their problem, not their agent, without revealing any of their real intelligence sources or methods. That first drop contained exactly 21 specific documents. Think about it. It was a concrete, tangible act of cooperation. It was enough to build a little bit of trust, but it was also controlled enough to protect their own secrets. I mean, it was truly a masterful bit of Cold War crisis management. So, after all this, what's the big takeaway? What's the real significance of this secret file? What new light does it actually shed on this old, dark mystery? Well, the key takeaways are actually pretty clear. First, the Soviets saw Oswald as a total nobody, an unstable nuisance. Second, their immediate reaction to the assassination wasn't joy, it was genuine terror. Third, their absolute top priority was to de-escalate, to stop things from spiraling into a wider conflict. And finally, they strategically used their secret Oswald file as a diplomatic tool to prove they had clean hands. And that, right there, is the real value of this dossier. It doesn't solve the whodunit of who actually fired the shots in Dallas. What it does, and what's so incredible, is it gives us this unprecedented, almost real-time look at how the world's other superpower dealt with the terrifying fallout and the very real possibility that they were about to be blamed for it all. So in the end, this file makes a really powerful case that the Soviets were not involved. But, and this is the big but, in revealing their own profound fear of being framed by someone else, some other powerful group, it kind of closes one door on the whole JFK mystery only to blow a dozen new ones wide open.